Hey guys, we just had our first freeze recently, and I was running through my mini mating nukes, and the ones that were really small, like the one framers, the freeze almost wiped them out, and we've got a few more nights of hard freezes coming. So I decided just to pull some extra queens this week. They're a little bit early. They were only about 2 weeks old. They had some eggs, some young larvae, younger than I would normally pull them. I don't generally pull them until they're 3 weeks old, but I don't think they're going to make it to next weekend. So I needed the queens anyways. I was grading a yard the other day and I found one that had a lot of really bad queens. So I'm gonna go ahead and just take a gamble on these younger queens because the old queens here just definitely aren't gonna make it. So I'm gonna requeen today. The weather is kind of limiting how much I can do each day. So I figured, hey, why not just spend a day requeening a few colonies? And if that's all the temperature allows, that's fine. So that's what I'm gonna be doing today. Part of the problem, the queens are old here. But as you can see, they've got some mite issues too, which is going to impact my brood pattern. But I spent a lot of time here the other day going through them. It really is a combination of mites and bad queens. These hives here were our cell builder colonies this spring. And so we ran them pretty hard. And the queens are from last year. But there's a lot of spottiness here, which is partly, again, because of mites. But I know the queens are bad because I didn't requeen them. And a lot of them are pretty beat up, old looking. So I'm going to just go ahead and pinch them and drop these new queens in. Now you can see the varroa mite moving around on that bee. Just went under the wing. So yeah, so this hive here is pretty well infested. I did medicate them a couple of days ago when I was here. So they've got a lot of issues. And that was a little frustrating because oh, there it goes. Look at that. That's terrible. So I'm going to have to come back and retreat this yard again too, I think. Part of the reason is that these few hives have such bad mites is because these were cell builder colonies, and because we were constantly pulling the cell builders, you have to basically rebuild from scratch every single week to keep them at peak strength to make your queen cells. So what you do is you bring in frames of cat brood, or open brood, or depending how you're doing it, and you just keep from other colonies, and you just keep dumping them into these colonies. And these were all originally triple deeps this spring, and we were just throwing in, I mean, sometimes we would have 15, 20 frames of cat brood in there. I would shake frames of nurse bees on top of it because you want your cell builders just to be boiling over with young bees. But of course, when you're doing that, not only are you're adding bees, but you're adding mites too. And so I think that's one of the reasons it got so high. And another mistake I believe I made was we were using Apivar this spring, because you've got to keep your mites down, otherwise they won't make cells. And what I was doing is I had taken the Apivar and just started sliding it in the entrance underneath the colonies. And the only reason I did that, because that's not what you should do, is because we were constantly moving these frames out every week, sometimes more than once a week. And honestly, it was just a pain in the butt to take the Apivar out, to rearrange the colony, put the Apivar back in. But now I can see the results of that, which are the mites way got out of control. The Apivars down here on the bottom board of the pallet just really weren't coming into contact with the mites, and the bulk of the mites are, of course, in your brood nest, which is where you're supposed to hang your Apivar strips down. It was probably a combination of me putting the Apivar in the wrong place, on top of these colonies being at, beyond peak strength that a normal colony would be, and me dumping in so much brood and bees to them. That was just a combination, has caused a lot of problems. And these queens too are just getting old. So it's just like they're getting double whacked. If I don't requeen them plus get the mites down, they're not going to make it. Definitely not make it to California. They may not even make it through the winter. The bees have begun to make a couple small supersedure cells here, so they're wanting to replace their queen. That's one of the reasons I saw this hive the other day. It made me slow down and start looking at some of the other queens in the yard. And I did see that high mite levels will trigger a supersedure response, but so will just a poorly performing queen. So I'm going to try to find her, and I'm definitely going to pinch her. Look at that poor bee. She is just, this hive is so infested with mites. There's deformed wing everywhere. I can see the mites crawling around on the bees. This is like catastrophic damage right here. Poor bee. It makes me sick when I see this. Look at this poor bee. She's got deformed wings. And what they'll do when they're sick, which is sad, but it's good for the colony, is they'll just come out of the colony and they'll die alone. So they don't die and reinfect the colony. The sick bees will usually do that. And it's hard to see with the grass. We see all those dead bees at the entrance down there on the ground. Those are probably bees that got infested with the viruses, and they either crawled out to die, or the undertaker bees, you know, brought them out if they died in the colonies. Look at that, many more supersedure cells, a lot of drone brood too. They really want to change their queen out. So I made a pretty common beekeeping mistake here. I'm still checking on that first hive in the yard. You know, when I pulled the frames out, I saw population wasn't bad. It was 5-6 frames. And I saw cat brood, and it's hard to see here in the shadow, but there's some older larvae. So I immediately made the assumption that it was queen right. And of course, I just spent 15 minutes ripping a double deep colony apart frame by frame to realize there is no queen here. When I started looking in the cells, I could find no eggs, no very young larvae. So there was a queen here, but something happened to her in less than a week, because it takes them about a week for them to fully cap that larva after the queen's laid the egg. And there are some larvae in here that have not been capped. So it's been just under a week since something happened to that queen. So all these, and I'm seeing many cells, so these cells may not be supersedure cells. They actually may be emergency response cells, because the queen, I'm not sure what could have happened. I kind of doubt they swarmed right now, but I don't see a version or anything. I did double check. It's she may have just died. Certainly could have been a mite issue, could have just made the hive so sick. The workers may have already killed the queen. Usually in my experience, if there's a supersedure cell, they'll allow the queen to lay until the new queen hatches, and then the workers will either kill the old queen or they'll hold her down so the new queen can kill her. Because generally in a fight, an old queen will almost 99% of the time will kill, believe it or not, the young or healthier queen. So the workers have to intervene to make sure the original older queen is killed and the new one takes over. And so I have seen it, I think, a few times where I've seen a supersedure cell and it's been queenless completely. So I've always kind of wondered, do the workers know that that queen is about to die, so they make the supersedure cell and the queen just dies off naturally? Or do sometimes the workers just kill that old queen even before the new one hatches? But, you know, from a survival standpoint, that seems kind of silly, because if that cell fails, the colony dies. Why not just leave your original queen laying? But I don't really know what could happen, and I could have accidentally pinched her, I don't know, when I was here. But that was just a few days ago, and I still would have expected to see some eggs or very young larvae. So anyways, if you're checking for a queen, go ahead and take the time to look for fresh eggs. So what I'm going to do here is, I've got one of the new queens I just caged yesterday. She's in there somewhere. And I'm going to go ahead and stick her here in the brood nest. And I know some people like to knock off the old cells. I'll be honest, I don't do it. I think the bees would much rather just have a fresh queen. This candy is fresh here, my candy plug. So she should chew out of here within 24 to 72 hours. And hopefully before these cells pop. But, you know, I don't care. I'm not going to go and cut every cell off. I just don't have time. I'm willing to take that risk. And hopefully this one will accept. And I'll get to the next one. So I will say, because we've got some hard freezes coming up and the nights are pretty cold, I did go ahead and wedge the cage here between the top bars. The bees already seem like they're happy with her. They're all over her. You want to make sure they have access to the candy plug right there. And of course they have access to the queen herself in the small holes on the cage. If I'm doing putting a lot of queens in, I really will just slide them in the entrance. I've seen zero difference between acceptance between me sliding that cage underneath versus putting here. But with the cold weather, I don't want to take that risk. I want her to stay in the brood nest where it's going to be good and warm and she can be taken care of. I'm still using my green thumbtack system here. That lets me know that queen has been changed. And I really like it. I'm really liking these thumbtacks better than using the flagging tape. And I can pop this thing off and reuse it. I'm really happy so far. In fact, that bee yard that I moved the other night had a bunch of tacks in them, and they actually survived the moving trip. So this might be my new system to stick with. I will say another benefit of wedging that cage in there in the top bars when you're going to requeen is, if whatever you're using to mark the hive to let you know that you know, it's been requeened, whether it's a thumbtack or flagging tape or whatever you're using, if somehow that marker comes loose, when you crack the hive in half, you'll see that new cage, and that lets you know that, hey, there's a new queen in there, a requeen or a split or whatever you did. I did find that kind of an issue when I slide the cage underneath is that sometimes I don't always flip the colonies up to look underneath. I usually only do that, in fact, when I'm grading for California, or maybe if I'm weight checking the colonies. So sometimes I would miss a colony because one of the pins would, rust or fall off or whatever. And I would miss the fact that I had requeened that colony. So kind of putting them in between the top bars is a nice like double marker. There's really no way that I'm probably going to miss that pin and a fresh cage in there. And that will force me next time I come around here to pull frames, to check, to make sure there's eggs, make sure she was accepted and that she's a good queen. So kind of a little bit of extra insurance. So here's another colony that was kind of weak. And I learned my lesson after that first colony. I started looking for eggs, and right away I saw there were no eggs. Obviously there's cap brood. There is some uncapped larvae, but it's pretty old. And you can see they've got a cell they haven't even quite finished yet. And then I've got a cell here that's been capped. So, and I saw several cells down on the bottom. So I'm guessing this queen is gone too. I see a lot of cells hanging from the bottom bar on one of the other frames. That actually makes, and one of them looks like it is a recent hatch. So I kind of wonder if maybe they have swarmed. This yard is one of my mustard yards, and it's not in full bloom, but they are hauling in mustard pollen pretty heavily. And as I'm digging around through these hives, I'm seeing a lot of frames packed full of bee bread, which usually is kind of a sign to me that the queen is failing because she's not laying enough for the bees to take that pollen and feed it back to the larva. But it could also just be that there was just a really large pollen flow in the area too. I mean, definitely some of it's mustard, but the bee bread is multicolored, so that's not the only pollen that's coming in. So they could have also just had a very strong pollen flow and triggered some swarming, or they could be super siegers, or I'm really not sure, to be honest. But I'm going to go ahead and give this one a queen because it's definitely queenless. And even though we still have quite a few drones around, there's drone brood in all of these colonies that I'm seeing. I don't want to risk them having to go through the whole mating flight and everything, so I would rather just give them a mated queen since I've got it. So this hive, this queen's not laying terrible. All of that is mostly eggs and larvae, but they've only got maybe a 3-frame population, and I can see, so she's marked. So we marked all these cell builder queens because if you ever make queen cells with a queen right colony, or if you have a queen right queen bank, go ahead and keep those queens marked because you rebuild them so often. If you get a queen up there with the cells or with your caged queens, then obviously they'll kill them. So we keep marking them. Sometimes you have to remark them. It doesn't last forever, but we only did that early this year. So she's pretty old. I mean, not super old, but since I'm seeing so many mite problems, I don't know, I'm already about halfway through the yard, and I've got more queens than I can use, really. So I may just go ahead and requeen these ones that I'm positive were very early queens, and we had problems with the early queens this year. We made them too soon, and I'm kind of on the fence about it, but I feel like a newer queen would probably be better, and really, and the proof is in the pudding, is that they're just a 3-frame colony, which part of its mites is doing the damage, but even the other colonies that have mites are larger than this. So I probably could leave her, but because I have spare queens and I'm here and I know she's old for a fact, I'm gonna go ahead and just pinch her. A new queen, in my opinion, is generally going to be better than a new queen, especially one that's not going to make the cut for almonds. So all I do is I just grab her, try to make it a holder, and then I just pinch her, really. I mean, I always hate doing it. It took me a long time to get used to killing them, but it's for the good of the colony. So what I do is, my little method is I just leave her body right there in the hive. That way the bees will detect, I think within a few minutes, I think they'll know they're queenless. I'm in the camp that 15 minutes those bees know they're queenless, and I will install the queen cage immediately. I know the rule of thumb for most people is to kill the queen and come back 8 hours or the next day or 24 hours or whatever. I used to do that, but since we started raising our own queens, and just because of my tight time schedule, I really just prefer to just pinch her, put in the new cage. I just started tracking that data this fall, so I don't have a lot of concrete information to say for a fact that it's better or worse to leave them overnight or whatever before installing a new queen. This is the system I pretty much have to use because I don't have time to come back and to put them in. It's just not really productive for me. But from what I've seen in the early stages, I have seen zero difference between killing her and putting in, installing the queen the next day or the same day. I see no difference whatsoever. And the real hard evidence for me that it should be just fine is because I use a queen-right queen bank, right? So I've got a queen that's running around a double deep with a queen excluder and a third deep box full of bees. And I cage my queens in the minis and I install them in the queen bank immediately, and they can stay in there for several days, for a week or whatever. And the vast majority of them are just fine. And I think the few that do die are probably because they got a pheromone issue or there's a problem with them, so the bees ignore them. So if they can handle being installed into a queen-right queen bank as soon as they're caged, why could they not handle what is now a queenless colony with a dead queen in there, which the bees will realize right away? So my personal opinion, I'll wait till the data comes out before I make a hard call on that, but my personal opinion so far, there's no difference between installing a queen into an immediately queenless colony, like in this situation, versus installing them the next day. That's just my opinion, but we'll see how the numbers play out. So this is a very clear example of a queen you want to pinch. If you can tell, her center left leg there is missing, or it's broken off about halfway. You see how she's moving, sort of kind of wobbly. She just seems a little jittery, a little erratic. She's running around a lot. See there, there she goes. She's having trouble hanging on to the comb. Anytime you've got a disabled queen like this, you want to just go ahead and pinch her. She's not going to do well. See that leg there is missing? If you ever see that, just go ahead and get rid of her. Sometimes they can limp along and they'll do okay, but it's best just to let them go and give them a new queen. So there we go. I'm going to pinch her. I already got the new cage here. I'll throw her in, and I'm going to stick that between the top bars, and this one will definitely improve with a new queen. So this is a single that I rebuilt, I think a couple of months ago. Something I have to check my notes, but it's been about a couple months. And I know it was a split. Well, one, because it was a single, and I rebuilt a lot of this yard. And one method I've been using to track that it's a queen that I installed, either requeen or a split that I made with one of my mated queens, is I've been leaving the cages here. I just kind of wedge them there in the side with some wax. That lets me know that, hey, that was a queen that was made this year. The start of next year, I'll pull all those cages out, and you know, then I'll put them in fresh. That's how I'm tracking the requeening. It's worked pretty well, and this queen was doing really good. And there she is. She's very pretty. She's very large. I love her color. I love those orange queens myself. They're my favorite color. But there is zilch brood here. Nothing. Not an egg, not a larva, not a cat brood. Zero. This is a brand new queen from probably a couple of months ago, and she's already petered out. The bees did not replace her for whatever reason. I mean, she's really huge too, but she's not doing her job. So I'm going to pinch her. I'm going to have to give this colony a little bit of brood, because you don't really want to install a new queen if there's a totally broodless colony. Even if they accept her, there may not be enough nurse bees to manage the new larvae that are laid, and the larvae will just die from starvation. I see it a lot, and some people will think they've got a bad queen. Really what it is, you have a low nurse bee population that can't care for all the eggs and the larvae that the new queen's laying so rapidly, and it'll look very spotty, the brood pattern, but it's actually the population that's incorrect. Either a low population, or you have a high ratio of old bees compared to young bees. So I'm gonna have to get rid of her, and man, she's really pretty. I hate it, but she's not doing her job, and we'll get this one back on track. And that happens, you know. Not every queen you make is going to be perfect, and just because it's a new queen doesn't mean she's going to lay for 6 months or a year. You really have to keep an eye on, and all queens too. It doesn't matter if the queen's a day old or 2 years old. They can give out at any second, and you just have to constantly check the brood all the time. There's no guarantee for longevity on queens whatsoever. You know, usually commercially produced queens you get 6 to 12 months out of, and especially the guys that pull their queens at 2 weeks, you're probably going to be lucky to get 6 months out of those queens. You'll be extremely lucky to get a good year out of them. So that's a problem. That's why if you want to let your queens lay for 3 or 4 weeks before you cage them and install them somewhere else, you're going to get higher longevity on top of every other possible benefit you could ever want from a queen. Just let them lay for another even week and make a massive difference. So that sucks. That does happen. But thankfully I've got some more queens. I'm going to change her out, and maybe the new queen will be better. So this colony here, this triple deep, you can see I wrote 2024 breeder on there. This is the single best colony we have in the entire apiary. I've been tracking it since the beginning of spring. It was a nuke that I made, and it just was amazing. I mean, wall to wall brood, high populations, beautiful, that beautiful orange yellow coloring that I love, hyper gentle. We grafted off her a little bit in the early part of spring, and I was really happy with her daughters. And then we got in the Jackie Parks Italians this summer from California, and we solely grafted off the Jackie Parks because we wanted to put more Italian genetics in the apiary this year. So unfortunately, we didn't graft off her anymore. And I've been just tracking it. Every time I come to this yard, I just look at it, and she's still there. I marked her a unique color, different than the 5 colors that you would normally use to mark a queen, and to make sure it's still her. And she's still there. She looks great. The brood looks healthy. I don't want to bother them. I don't want to stress them out anymore, but they've made it through almost a whole year. And what I'll do is, I have other colonies I'm selecting like this that it's very strong, and I'm leaving it a triple deep just so it has, I don't risk any swarming because she's so strong. I want to make sure she has all the resources. If they get robbed, I want to make sure she has the population to defend herself. It's just to protect her, and she's holding that box down, so it's fine, and she's not over supered. And this is what I'm starting to do around now. As I'm grading, I'll just pick out some of the best hives that I have that have the qualities I want. You know, gentleness, high population, good brood production, low mite numbers, you know, things like that. And those are the colonies that we won't send to California and we'll keep behind, and I'll graft off those. My plan next year is to graft solely off our own bees because I'm pretty happy with the genetics that we have. Every year in the past, we've always bought a sample of other breeders and mixed them in. So we have a very diverse gene pool, but I'm ready for us to start sort of tailoring our own genetics so we can kind of develop our own type of queen as much as we can without getting into artificial insemination, which I'm not ready to do just yet. And she's going to be she's the queen of the queens. So I want to make sure she's happy and taken care of. And a lot of our bees are going to be coming from her if she can make it to next spring, and some of the other colonies that are almost as good, but she's definitely the best. But that's something you want to start looking for if you want to raise queens. Start looking for your colonies at the end of the year that hopefully you've been tracking all year, and you can just select the best of the best, and that'll determine your genetics for the next year. Bees are a little cranky with this cold weather, so I'm not taking the veil off. They are trying to tear me up. But I requeened all of the hives here that had less than a 6-frame population, and were clearly not caused by something else. Like if there was a high mite load, that's probably an issue. You know, if they had too much foundation or whatever, if they look like they've been robbed, those I don't think are queen issues, although some of them I kind of took a gamble and requeened anyways because I had the queens. It's a hard call sometimes when you're coming around to requeen because there's so many other factors that it can impact population and the brood health. I generally lean on the side that if you have the queens, better to go ahead and install a new queen than try to keep an old one that's underperforming, because you know, anything that's on that smaller side is not going to be any good for California. And if those splits or those requeens fail, the good thing about it starting to get cold is that the moss and the beetles shouldn't do too much damage too quickly to the comb. So if there is a dead out, I should be able to take those resources and spread them back around the bee yard, or stack two good singles. You know, if one single fails and one makes it, I'll just merge them together. So there's still a lot of options I can do. I was willing to take that risk. There were 3 triple deeps in the yard. I just marked with orange flags. I broke them all down to singles. I just marked them with an orange flag just in case when I come back around and something seems off, the population dropped or whatever. There's not an issue. It's just to remind me, hey, I split those colonies. They're still queen right. They still got everything they need. And then what I did is I just popped their 3rd super over here, pinned them, and they're good single splits. The downside is I wasn't planning on making any splits today. I was just planning on requeening, but I had extra queens. I still have a few extra queens left over even after all this. The mites were the biggest issue here, and now that I took my time to look through them, because I had to rush last time I was here, I see it's not so much a queen problem as a mite problem. But so I went ahead and just made the splits anyways. If you're a new beekeeper, I don't recommend making splits in December. Don't do it. I have to break down my triple deeps. Obviously, I'm leaving that one. That's my breeder. But I have to break those down because I can only put 2-story colonies on the semi for California. I can't fit a 3-story. Normally what I would do in the situation, I would just take the top box off and I would shake all the bees off. Then I would spread any brood or honey or whatever around throughout the whole yard. But just because I have all these extra queens on hand, because I rushed and caged them a little early because of the freezes, I decided to take the risk to make some December splits. If they don't make it again, you know, I'll combine them together. I'll just, you know, I will have wasted my time essentially. And, you know, 3 queens. I'm willing to take that risk. You know, but that's me. That's my situation. The average beekeeper doesn't need to do that. Don't make any splits in December. That's my recommendation. There's a little bit of robbing going on in the yard, like you can see behind me. It's not terrible. I had to be pretty quick to requeen, and as you know, sometimes it can take quite a while to find the queen. You have to leave the colonies open, and that invites them to rob. I've noticed they tend to want to rob a little bit after that cold spell and the sun comes out. They sort of just rush out. They're in a bad mood. They want to sting you. They want to kill each other. But I was here. I had to get it done. So I took that risk. But you really, really need to be careful if you're requeening colonies like I was doing today, because more than probably anything else, if you have robbing going on in the yard, it will drop your new queen acceptance rate dramatically. Like you can have 100% failure on acceptance. It has zero to do with the queens or the hive they were put in. It's just the robbing will drop the acceptance rate. Thankfully, they're not robbing too bad. They're being a little nosy. I don't like it, but I think I got out of here before any damage was done. I was also going to say that, you see, I just came here and fed them a really thin syrup a few days ago. So that thin syrup will feed the bees, and that will also increase my queen acceptance this time of year. On top of the fact there's just a load of mustard pollen coming in over here. So I feel pretty good about the acceptance. I'll be interested to see how this yard does with these 2-week-old queens, because it's just not something I typically do. So I've marked all that and I tracked everything, and I want to see how they'll hold up, because I just generally think a 3-week-old queen is going to be much better. But you know, sometimes you have to do what you have to do. All right, well, I'm going to get out of here. I don't want to bother the hives anymore. I don't want to risk them robbing. There's really not much else I can do. And I'll talk to you guys later. Thanks. Bye.